Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Dreamforce. Glad to have you guys here today. And we're going to do a quick 20-minute talk on control data access with Apex, Visualforce, and Lightning. My name is Lihan Huang. I'm on the product security team. You may have seen my name or worked with me if you've gone through the App Exchange security review, and that is part of my job. And today's topic will help you guys understand how to do access control with your package and within your org. So before we begin, we got to talk about the forward-looking statement, which you may have seen many, many times. This just states that we will talk about some existing features and also future products, but please make your purchasing decisions on anything that's available today. Agenda for today, we will talk about the security and the Salesforce platform. And then we'll go right into the topic. We'll talk about crud. We'll talk about FLS. And then sharing. There won't be a time for Q&A, but I will be available after the talk if you have any questions. OK, security in the Salesforce platform. So Salesforce is a very extendable platform. We have a lot of customization options, not only within your org, where you click at settings, or you can also have code. Now, that gives a lot of flexibility what you need to do for your business needs. However, that also means there's a lot of things that could go wrong or things that you don't do that would inadvertently leak information or have unintended results. So part of the things that I want to talk about today is how to properly control access. And with that, we'll lead into, in security, we have this concept called defense in depth. And defense in depth means we want to try to have as many layers of protection as we can to protect the data that we want to protect. Now, within it, there's a concept called principal least privilege. That means that users or anybody on your system should only have minimum amount of information they need to do their duties, to do their job. And CRUD, FLS, and sharing will help you accomplish that. And this is an important concept that we always remind ourselves pretty often when we do any kind of security work. The second thing we want to talk about before we go into is system versus user context. So Apex code on the server side executes in the system context. Actually, let's talk about user context first. So we have server-side code, and we have client/server-side code like Visualforce and Lightning. Now, user context means the system knows that you can enforce like what user you are, and it can enforce permissions for you. So that includes FLS, includes sharing, and includes CRUD. Now, we also have system context. So that's essentially God mode for Apex. That means it has access to everything. It ignores CRUD FLS sharing rules. That's because we don't want your code to throw any exceptions if you're trying to access that as a user that doesn't have access to the data. So that's also two things that I will mention a lot during this talk. So what is CRUD FLS and sharing? This is a slide that I like to use to introduce the concept. It's actually pretty cool and pretty simple. So we have a simple spreadsheet here. On the very bottom, we have the different objects that's available in Salesforce. So CRUD controls that. And CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So now we're looking at contacts. So that tells the system whether if this user can access the contact object, can read the contact object, et cetera. Next level down, we have field level security. So that's up top in the red. So that controls access to the different fields within each object. So for accounts, we have first name, last name, title, mailing street, etc. Sometimes we don't want users to be able to see every single field, as you'll see later in our demo. So field level security will help you control that. Lastly, we have sharing. So sharing controls record level access. So in here we have this is 10 different 10 different records inside our account or contacts. Let's say I want to share just users 2 and 3 on there. So you can accomplish that with sharing. So our demo today will be done through this Fluffy Bunnies app that we develop inside the developer org. This will demonstrate the differences between a custom developed Apex Visualforce application called Quick View here. So it just shows accounts and the associated opportunities. Has a little search option. So we're going to use this to demonstrate the issues with control in your Apex code. We're going to demonstrate this with a very simple user. It's just a clone standard user profile. You can access the Quick View app, but you shouldn't be able to see accounts revenue field, nor can you see the opportunities. And you can see in the demo earlier, and I think in the screenshot here, you can see that right now. And that's what we're going to fix throughout the talk. So CRUD and FLS. What is CRUD and FLS? So again, that stands for create, read, update, and delete. It defines these users' access for objects, and it's controlled by the administrators in the settings via profiles and permission sets. So the screenshot there, these are for standard object permissions. If you go into settings in your org and you look at a specific profile, this is the checkbox label layout that you'll see. So for this particular user, you can do all the operations on accounts. However, you can only read campaigns. And what is FLS? It stands for field level security. It defines users' access to the fields for each different object. It's also controlled by administrators via profiles and permission sets. So in your settings, you go and you click on the object you want to edit, and then you'll get each of the different fields supported with the object, and then the checkboxes. So FLS is similar to CRUD. However, there's only two settings. There's only read and edit. Read and edit. Doesn't make sense to have a delete. Delete is a object level control. So you can do read or edit access for each of the different fields. Some things to keep in mind for developers on CRUD FLS. Just keep in mind that Apex classes do not enforce CRUD FLS by default. Runs in system context. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't want your code to throw exceptions. The best way to guarantee that is to have your code to be able to access everything. On the downside, you'll have to use some of our built-in methods on the platform to properly control access in your code. The other two things are that Visualforce pages do enforce CRUD and FLS, but only if you use the S-object notation. What does that mean? You'll see an example later. So generally, it does run in user context, but you have to keep it inside the S-object notation. So if you put it in a wrapper or a variable, that's not going to work. Lastly, we have Lightning. So Lightning is a client-side controller. So if you're a developer, you understand that once you pass data from the server to your browser, it's really hard to control access there. You can't do any great client-side controls because a knowledgeable user can always go inside your browser's DOM and see something even if it's hidden. So you have to do the controls on the server side. Okay, we'll show a demo on what's wrong with our quick view app. So this is our standard list view in accounts. We can see that we can view certain accounts, and then we're going to take a look at Bill's Pet Shop. In the details, you should see that we do not have access to the annual revenue field. So this is standard platform controls for our clone user profile. However, if we go to our quick view app, we can see the annual revenue. So we don't want to hide it for everybody. We only want to hide it for certain users that don't have permission. How will we do that? We'll enforce CRUD in our Apex code. So for each of the four words that CRUD stands for, there is a corresponding function you can call. So it's creatable, it's accessible, it's updatable, and it's deletable. So those are methods that's associated with each of the objects, and it will return a Boolean value whether you can access this object or not. So one example way you can do so is in your controller. Let's say I'm going to take my account. So I'm just going to do a simple if statement. If this user, accounts get described, cannot access this object, I'm going to return nothing. Otherwise, I'll continue my code. In Visualforce, it's a little simple, a little easier, if you keep it inside the S-object notation. So in the top half, you can see that I'm directly referencing the object itself and directly referencing the field. You see ___ C, I'm referencing the API name. So the system's going to see this and be like, OK, I know what object this is, and I know how to enforce permissions for this particular user. However, if you take the raw value out, so I take the annual revenue, $1 million, and I put it inside a variable, I put it inside a wrapper object, you're taking it outside the context for the system. You're putting it inside a variable that the system doesn't know the access to, so it won't be able to enforce that for you. And you'll have to do it inside your Apex controller. And lastly, in Lightning, it's basically the same as the latter half of the previous slide. It won't enforce it automatically for you. You're going to have to do it inside your Apex controller. So here's a demo on how we will fix it in our quick view app. So we want to hide the opportunity fields right now. So we'll just go into our developer console. This is our controller code for the Quick View app. And in there, we have the search account default function. So that's what happens when you click the search button or when the page loads. So we already have this statement commented out. We're just going to take out the if true and actually look at the Boolean check. So we're checking for opportunity. We're checking to see if the field is the object is accessible. Now we're also passing inside to Visualforce page a variable that tells it whether the user can see it. This is simply for UI effects. We don't want to show the opportunities column so the users can't see it. It just doesn't look good. Okay, we'll save it and go back to our Quick View app and see what happens. All right, now opportunity is successfully hidden, and you can see that you can no longer see the opportunity column either. Cool. Now we'll go into FLS. Enforcing FLS is very, very similar. There is actually oh, no, never mind. So there's 3 checks you can do inside FLS. So for each of the fields, you can do is accessible, is creatable, or is updatable. Now, the syntax is very similar, except for going at the object level, you're going to go one layer down and pull out the field that you're checking. So in this particular case, we're checking for annual revenue. We're going to take the account array, take the fields, annual revenue, and then we're checking whether the user can see this particular field. Visualforce, same concept. If you keep it inside your S-object notation, all gravy. It can enforce it for you. However, if I take that value out and I put it inside my own variable, system doesn't know what you're referencing. This value could be, a raw string. It could be an array. It could be another object. So it will just ignore FLS controls, and you'll have to do your check inside the Apex controller. Same goes for Lightning. All Lightning is a JavaScript framework on the client side, so it has no idea, no concept of what object you're calling. So in this case, you're going to need to do the access control inside your Apex controller. So now we'll go back to our Fluffy Bunnies app and take a look at how we're going to hide the annual revenue for this particular standard user. It's going to look very similar, actually. So we'll scroll down to our Boolean check here. So let's just comment out our if true statement and then do a check of whether this user can access the accounts revenue field or annual revenue field. Again, we're passing in a variable to tell Visualforce to hide a specific column. Now, this is actually a little bit more important for fields because sometimes you can actually leak information about your object if you don't hide the field name. An example would be, actually, let's finish the demo first. So you can see now you refresh Quick View, you no longer see the annual revenue field. Now going back to what I was saying about hiding the field names, sometimes you could actually have a field name, just the name, not the data, in your object that could be considered sensitive. So for example, if you have employee account and you have is on probation, you don't want your users to be able to see that field if they don't have access to it. So this is especially important for certain fields inside your accounts. Just some best practices for CRUD and FLS. Even though the system can enforce it for you, it's always a good idea to put the check inside your Apex classes, just in case your code changes in the future, or just in case you change the layout, you change the schema of your objects, you always have a check, a backup, defense and depth in your Apex code. For FLS, you want to check for each of the fields returned. A thing to note here is that you can actually just check for FLS for your fields, and you don't have to check for CRUD. So if I can't access the contact object, for example, and I check FLS for contact's first name, it will return false. So it basically checks CRUD for you. OK, so that's CRUD and FLS. Now we're going to talk a little bit about sharing. This is literally very little. Sharing is very simple. It's a record level access. So it tells the system which records of the bunch of records you have with your object this user can see. It's not inside a profile. It's controlled in org-wide defaults and rules, ownership, and sharing rules. So you can see here that for this particular sharing for this org, contacts are public read-only. So I create a contact. Anybody else can read it, but it's not editable for them. For developers, again, Apex classes do not enforce sharing by default. Runs in system context. There are some exceptions. So when you're running inside anonymous code blocks, inside a developer console, or inside standard controllers. This sharing is a solely server level check, so it can't do it inside Visualforce or Lightning. And another thing to note is that this fine-tunes CRUD access, so it doesn't override it. So sharing can't give you permission that you don't already have. All it does is narrows down what records you can access. So let's take a look at our quick view app one more time. We'll go to our accounts. Let's view. We can see all accounts. We can only see 5 of them. But in quick view, we'll do a search. There's all of a sudden 2 secret pet shops that this user should not be able to see. We're going to hide it in our Apex controller. How do you do that in Apex? So by default, if you don't declare the keyword, it will do so without sharing. So all you need to do is add the with sharing keyword. Now, 2 caveats with this is that if you don't declare with either of them, it inherits the current sharing rules. So if you have a subclass that doesn't have the keyword and the parent class does, it would inherit that behavior. Another thing is that the rules come from where the class is defined, not what the method is called. So if I have a method defined in a class that has with sharing, and I call it in a class that doesn't have sharing, it will still enforce the sharing rules. So let's fix this now in our Fluffy Bunnies app. So we don't want to see the secret pet shop for this particular user. We'll go back to our Apex controller. And all you need to do is add the with sharing keyword. Very simple, 2-word fix. Let's do a quick save, and then we'll go back and see our app, see how it behaves now. Okay, now the system knows to enforce sharing with this particular controller, and then it will appropriately hide the records that the user can't see. Cool. Some best practices for sharing. Always declare with or without sharing. So even though it has the default behavior, it's a good idea to declare it so you can come back and know what's going on with your code. If you must use without sharing, definitely document the reason in your comment block. So there's generally not a reason why you want to have without sharing, unless you have very specific cases. So it's a good idea to comment it in case you need to come back and change your code. And this is especially important for App Exchange security reviews. When we see without sharing, we almost will always ask why. So it's a good idea just to have it in there so we don't have to have back and forth. Sharing. So another thing to keep in mind is that sharing keywords don't enforce CRUD and FLS, and it's a separate concept. So that was a lot of stuff in 20 minutes, but we have some great references online that can talk about different security aspects. And also, you have a great Trailhead if you haven't checked it out yet. Trailhead is a good way to learn about Salesforce and a bunch of other stuff. And then we also have some implementation guide for our partners that are going through the App Exchange security process. You'll know exactly what we're looking for and things to do in your code to make sure you have a smooth process. Lastly, some promotion from our awesome security team. We have a lot of talks going on a couple days ago, and then today and tomorrow. So check them out. It's going to be around here and possibly upstairs. Lastly, thank you guys very much for being here with me. Let's talk about security concepts, and hope you guys have a great Dreamforce.